Attention! Prepare yourself for a deep journey into one of the most macabre and disturbing cases in the history of New Orleans. Before we begin, please write in the comments below where you are listening from and what time it is at this exact moment. We also ask that you subscribe by clicking subscribe to help us produce more documented accounts like this every day. The summer of 1939 in New Orleans was particularly unforgiving. Heat clung to the skin like a fever, and the air hung heavy with moisture that seemed to trap every sound, every whisper within the narrow streets of the French Quarter. It was during this oppressive summer that the Devereaux family first moved into the old Marigny property on Burgundy Street, a once grand townhouse that had fallen into elegant decay over decades of neglect. Thomas Devereaux, a professor of anthropology at Tulane University, had inherited the property from a distant relative he claimed to have never met. This peculiar detail would later raise questions among investigators, but in those early weeks of summer, it seemed merely an odd stroke of luck for the academic and his wife Eleanor. What no one knew then, what no one could have possibly predicted, was that the Devereaux residence would become the epicenter of a series of events so disturbing that official records would later be sealed by order of the Louisiana State Police. Even now, more than 2 decades later, mentions of the case in academic circles are met with uncomfortable silence or immediate changes of subject. But silence has never been a guardian of truth, merely its temporary jailer. According to neighbors who still resided in the area during the formal investigation of 1958, the Devereaux family appeared perfectly ordinary at first glance. Thomas was described as reserved but cordial, a slender man of 43, with prematurely graying hair and wire-rimmed spectacles that he cleaned obsessively during conversations. Eleanor was younger by almost 15 years, with dark hair always pinned meticulously away from her face, revealing eyes that one neighbor described as bottomless, like looking into 2 wells that never reflected light properly. The couple had no children, a fact that seemed to be a source of unspoken tension between them, according to Marguerite Fontenot, who lived across the street and occasionally took tea with Eleanor during those first months. What struck many as unusual was the extensive renovation work that began almost immediately after the Devereaux took possession of the property. Heavy drapes were installed on all windows. The basement, which had previously been sealed due to flooding concerns common in the low-lying areas of New Orleans, was excavated and reinforced. Deliveries of unusual scientific equipment arrived weekly. Glass containers, recording devices, specialized measuring instruments, and books. So many books that delivery men complained about the weight and volume. Most curious of all was the constant presence of local workers who, according to multiple accounts, were never hired from the same company twice, and who were all asked to sign unusual confidentiality agreements before beginning work on different sections of the house. By September of 1939, the renovations appeared complete, and the true strangeness began. Thomas Devereaux took an unexpected sabbatical from his university position, a decision that raised eyebrows among his colleagues, particularly as he had just received a significant research grant focused on comparative religious practices in Louisiana's isolated communities. According to department records obtained during the subsequent investigation, Thomas had submitted a revised research proposal that mentioned studying blood symbolism in predictive rituals across cultures, though the full document has since disappeared from university archives. Eleanor Devereaux, meanwhile, withdrew almost completely from the limited social circle she had established. Marguerite Fontenot recalled the last time she saw Eleanor before the winter of that year. She came to return a book she had borrowed, something about lunar cycles and their effects on human behavior. Her hands were stained with something dark that looked like ink, but didn't quite wash away like ink should. She seemed distracted, kept looking at her wristwatch every few minutes as if timing our conversation. Before leaving, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said, Time isn't what we think it is, Marguerite. It's not a river flowing in one direction. It's a circle, and we're trapped in it. But Thomas has found a way to see beyond the circle. When I asked what she meant, she just smiled in this empty way and said she had already said too much. This was the last normal interaction any neighbor reported having with either of the Devereaux. Throughout the fall of 1939, the house on Burgundy Street became increasingly sealed off from the outside world. Mail accumulated until the postman was instructed to hold all deliveries. Groceries were delivered by a single boy from the corner market, who was instructed to leave the packages on the front step and ring the bell twice before leaving. Payment would be left in an envelope taped to the inside of the screen door. The delivery boy, Albert Prejean, now a business owner in Baton Rouge, recalled that the envelopes often contained more money than necessary, along with odd notes written in what he described as a shaky hand, not like a professor's writing should be. One of these notes, preserved in the case files, read simply, "The barriers between moments are thinning. We can hear tomorrow whispering through the cracks in the foundation." By December, even these limited interactions had ceased. The house stood silent on Burgundy Street, its windows dark behind heavy drapes, no smoke rising from the chimneys despite the unusual cold that had descended on New Orleans that winter. Neighbors assumed the couple had left town for the holidays, though no one recalled seeing them depart. It wasn't until the early hours of December 21st, the winter solstice, that anyone had reason to believe otherwise. According to police reports filed that morning, a call came in at approximately 3:15 in the morning from a resident 5 houses down from the Devereaux property. The caller, whose name has been redacted from official records but who local sources identify as William Thibodeau, reported screaming like nothing human coming from the direction of the supposedly empty house. When pressed by the dispatcher, Thibodeau clarified that the sound was not a woman's scream or a man's either. More like the sound you'd imagine a tree would make if it could scream while being split by lightning. 2 officers were dispatched to investigate. They arrived at 3:47, according to the official report, finding the house dark and apparently undisturbed. After receiving no response to repeated knocking, they circled the property and discovered a basement window emitting a faint reddish light. Looking through this window, Officer Martin Hebert observed what he described in his report as a scientific setup of some kind, with glass containers connected by tubes surrounding what appeared to be a large metal basin in the center of the room. When he attempted to gain a better view, the light suddenly extinguished. Concerned about possible illegal activity, rumors of underground distilleries were still common in post-Prohibition New Orleans. The officers forced entry through the back door. What they found inside has been heavily censored from official reports, with entire pages either missing or redacted. What remains are fragmentary descriptions that create more questions than answers. References to extensive symbolic markings covering all walls and floors, glass containers filled with substances requiring biochemical analysis, and most disturbingly, evidence of recent occupancy despite advanced decomposition inconsistent with timeline. By dawn, the house had been sealed off as a potential crime scene. Neighbors gathered on the street watched as additional police vehicles arrived, followed by an unmarked black car from which emerged 3 men in suits who identified themselves as federal agents, though from which agency was never specified. By noon, the property had been completely cordoned off, and all officers previously on the scene had been replaced by these unidentified federal agents. What happened next remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Despite the apparent seriousness of whatever was discovered inside, no formal criminal investigation was ever publicly acknowledged. No missing persons report was ever filed for the Devereaux. Their bank accounts, according to financial records subpoenaed during the 1958 inquiry, continued to show regular activity for months after their disappearance, though exclusively in the form of withdrawals made by mail. The house on Burgundy Street remained sealed for 6 months, during which time neighbors reported strange activities, lights visible at odd hours despite the property being supposedly vacant, unusual equipment being removed in the middle of the night, and perhaps most unsettling, the distinct smell of chemicals and something described as coppery, like blood but older somehow, that lingered around the property for weeks. When the house was finally unsealed in July of 1940, it was immediately purchased by a corporation later determined to be a shell company with connections to a research division within the federal government. The entire property was renovated once again, all traces of the Devereaux and whatever had occurred there meticulously erased. The case might have remained completely buried were it not for the persistence of one individual, Dr. James Winters, a former colleague of Thomas Devereaux at Tulane University. In 1957, nearly 18 years after the disappearance, Winters began making formal inquiries about his former colleague. According to his personal correspondence, now preserved in the university archives, Winters had been reviewing some of Devereaux's early published works for a research project when he discovered something unsettling. In a letter to the university's president dated October 12, 1957, Winters wrote, "Upon revisiting Thomas's papers on comparative religious practices, I've made a disturbing discovery. The theoretical framework he developed regarding cyclical time concepts and blood rituals contains mathematical formulas that appear to predict with alarming accuracy several major world events that occurred years after his disappearance. This cannot be mere coincidence. Either Thomas possessed predictive abilities that defy rational explanation, or he continues his work somewhere, feeding these predictions back into academic circulation through proxies. Neither possibility offers much comfort." Winters' inquiry triggered a reluctant internal university investigation, which eventually expanded to include local police and, briefly, the FBI. Records indicate that between 1937 and 1940, 7 other academic researchers across the American South had similarly vanished after beginning work on projects related to what was variously described as predictive anthropology, blood symbology and forecasting rituals, or temporal displacement theories. In each case, the disappearances were handled with minimal public attention, properties were purchased by similar shell corporations, and inquiries were systematically discouraged by various official channels. What these investigations uncovered was a complex web of inconsistencies and disturbing patterns that suggested the Devereaux case was merely one node in a much larger network of unusual activities across southern Louisiana during that period. Most significant to understanding the Devereaux case specifically was the discovery of Eleanor's journal, found hidden within a wall during renovation work done on a neighboring property in 1953. The journal had apparently been hidden there sometime before the couple's disappearance. While only fragments remain legible due to water damage, what can be read provides chilling context to the events on Burgundy Street. In an entry dated November 3, 1939, Eleanor wrote, "T believes he has found the mathematical constant that connects blood composition to temporal perception. The formulas are beyond my understanding, but the implications are not. If he's correct, the barrier between now and then is merely biochemical. He has already successfully sent objects forward. The watch returned completely altered, its mechanisms impossibly advanced. Now he speaks of larger tests. I fear what he intends." A later entry dated December 12 reads, "The basement has been prepared according to his specifications. The equipment arrived from Vienna last week. How he secured it in these troubled European times, he refuses to say. The circle is complete. 23 points around the circumference, each representing what he calls a critical moment of human development. He has calculated that the convergence occurs at the solstice. There is no turning back now. He insists that it's the only way we can survive what's coming. He has seen it, he says, the future, the end, and the only escape is through. The final entry, dated December 20th, the day before the reported disturbance, contains only this cryptic passage. He has taken 7 quarts of his own blood over the past week. It doesn't seem medically possible for him to function, yet he does. The formulas cover every surface now. I can hear something behind them, like whispers just below the threshold of hearing. He says that's the sound of time unraveling at the edges. Tonight, he makes the final connection. May God forgive us both. The journal ends there. Whatever occurred on the night of December 21st remains largely conjecture, pieced together from fragmentary evidence and the reluctant testimonies of those peripherally involved. What seems clear is that Thomas Devereux, driven by some conviction about impending catastrophe, had developed a theory that human blood, properly prepared and utilized within specific mathematical formulas, could somehow breach what he perceived as the circular nature of time. The most disturbing evidence recovered from the scene, according to sealed testimony later leaked to researchers, was a recording device found in the basement. The machine itself was of conventional design, but the recording it contained featured what audio experts described as chronological impossibilities. The tape contained segments of radio broadcasts discussing events that had not yet occurred in 1939, including detailed descriptions of World War II events that would not happen until 1943 and 1944. Interspersed with these fragments were sounds described in technical analysis as unlike any known acoustic phenomena, and a voice identified as Thomas Devereux reciting mathematical formulas and repeating the phrase, "The circle breaks, the line extends," at irregular intervals. Dr. James Winter's investigation came to an abrupt end in February of 1958. According to official records, he suffered a fatal heart attack while working late in his university office. However, the night janitor who found his body, Raymond Duplessis, told a local reporter that Winter's office had been torn apart like a hurricane hit it inside, and that the professor's body showed signs of what he called unnatural fear. Most troubling was Duplessis' claim that a symbol had been drawn on Winter's office wall in what appeared to be blood, a circle with 23 marks around its circumference, identical to what had been described in Eleanor's journal. The reporter who took Duplessis' statement, Catherine Moreau of the New Orleans Sentinel, began her own investigation into both the original Devereux case and Winter's death. Her notes, preserved by her family after her resignation from the paper in 1959, reveal a pattern of interference and intimidation from unnamed officials as she pursued the story. In one of her final entries, dated May 18, 1959, Moreau wrote, "The connections are too pronounced to ignore. The same pattern repeats: research into time and blood, disappearances, federal intervention, suppression of evidence. But the most disturbing aspect is the predictions. I've verified that Devereux's papers, published before 1939, contain veiled references to specific events that would later occur during the war and beyond. His formula, hidden within seemingly standard anthropological notation, accurately predicted the exact dates of major world events decades in advance. If this mathematical system truly functions as some kind of temporal window, the question becomes, what did Devereux see that terrified him enough to attempt what the evidence suggests he tried on that December night? Moreau never published her findings. After receiving a midnight phone call on June 2, 1959, she abruptly resigned from the newspaper, sold her house in New Orleans, and relocated to a small town in northern Maine, where she refused all contact with former colleagues. When contacted by researchers in 1968, she would say only, "Some doors should remain closed. Some knowledge isn't meant for us. I've seen where the circle breaks, and there's nothing on the other side you want to know about." The Devereux case file was officially closed in July of 1959, with no conclusions reached regarding the fate of Thomas and Eleanor. The house on Burgundy Street changed hands multiple times over subsequent years, with none of its owners remaining in residence longer than 8 months. Current property records show it is now owned by another shell corporation with a post office box in Washington, D.C. In 1967, during renovations to convert the property into apartments, workers discovered a sealed metal box within a concrete section of the basement floor. According to the contractor's report, the box contained a single item, a wristwatch of unusual design, its hands frozen at 3:15. Metallurgical analysis of the watch components revealed anomalies that experts struggled to explain, including alloys that, according to one specialist, utilize manufacturing techniques that don't currently exist. Most unusual was the inscription on the back, which read simply, December 21st, 2039, when the circle closes again. The watch disappeared from the evidence room 3 days after its discovery. The official explanation cited clerical error. Perhaps the most unsettling epilogue to this already disturbing case came in 1968, when a visiting anthropology professor from Switzerland was granted access to some of Devereux's surviving papers as part of a broader study on comparative religious practices in the American South. After spending several weeks with the materials, the professor, Dr. Lucas Brenner, requested an urgent meeting with university officials. According to minutes from that meeting, Brenner claimed to have deciphered the mathematical system underlying Devereux's work. It is not merely predictive, Brenner is recorded as saying, it is iterative. The formulas suggest that time moves not in a straight line, nor even in a simple circle, but in a spiral that periodically brings certain points into alignment. Devereux believed these alignments created momentary bridges between different temporal positions. But more disturbing is his conclusion that each cycle ends with what he termed absolute terminus, a point beyond which the spiral cannot continue. According to his calculations, this terminus coincides with December 21st, 2039. What's truly chilling is that when I applied modern computational methods to test his formulas, using events unknown in Devereux's time as input variables, the equations continued to yield accurate predictions with 97.6% accuracy. Dr. Brenner recommended that all of Devereux's remaining papers be sealed indefinitely. This recommendation was implemented immediately, with additional security measures put in place that seem excessive for merely academic materials. Dr. Brenner returned to Switzerland shortly thereafter, and, in a perhaps predictable development, disappeared during a hiking expedition in the Alps 3 months later. His body was never recovered. The Devereux case has since faded into obscurity, mentioned occasionally in specialized academic journals as a historical curiosity, an example of how brilliant minds can become consumed by delusion and paranoia. The official stance, maintained by both university officials and government representatives when rarely pressed on the matter, is that Thomas Devereux likely suffered from an undiagnosed mental illness that led him to elaborate fantasies and potentially dangerous experimental practices, resulting in some accident that claimed both his and his wife's lives. Yet questions persist. The mathematical formulas, which still survive in fragments across Devereux's published works, continue to demonstrate an unexplainable predictive accuracy when applied to subsequent historical events. The disappearances of others researching similar topics during the same period remain largely unexplained. And perhaps most troubling, the date inscribed on the mysterious watch, December 21st, 2039, has appeared in other unrelated contexts across decades of parapsychological research, often associated with concepts of temporal endpoints or cyclical completion. Former residents of the neighborhood around Burgundy Street, particularly those who lived there in the 1950s and 60s, still speak of unusual phenomena associated with the property: electrical disturbances, unexplainable cold spots, and the occasional sound of what one resident described as glass tubes clinking together, emanating from the empty basement. Visitors to the property frequently report a sensation of temporal disorientation, describing minutes that seem to stretch for hours or sudden gaps in memory while on the premises. In the absence of conclusive evidence, the true nature of what occurred in the Devereux house remains speculative. Was it merely the tragic outcome of a brilliant mind's descent into obsession and madness? Or did Thomas Devereux actually discover something about the fundamental nature of time, something so disturbing that all evidence of his discovery had to be systematically erased? What can be stated with certainty is this: on the night of December 21st, 1939, something occurred in the basement of that house on Burgundy Street that defied conventional explanation. Whatever it was left traces that continue to resist all attempts at rational analysis. And somewhere, possibly, the knowledge that Thomas Devereux uncovered continues to exist. Knowledge about the circular nature of time, the predictive properties of blood, and a terminus point waiting at the end of the spiral. In a final, disturbing coda to this account, it should be noted that among the few surviving personal effects of Thomas Devereux recovered from the house was a small notebook containing what appeared to be draft versions of his predictive formulas. On the last page, written in a frantic hand unlike his usually meticulous notation, was this single line: "The error was believing we could escape. The terminus is not the end of time, but its beginning. The circle cannot be broken, only transcended." The notebook currently resides in a temperature-controlled storage facility at a university archive where it remains classified. According to the archivists who maintain the collection, the page containing this final message has begun to deteriorate in recent years, the ink fading not from the edges inward, as would be expected with normal aging, but from the center outward, as if the words themselves were being slowly erased from existence. The house on Burgundy Street still stands, though it has been extensively renovated and divided into luxury apartments. Current residents report no unusual occurrences, no strange sounds from the sealed basement, no unexplainable phenomena. The past, it seems, has been successfully buried beneath layers of modern convenience and willful forgetfulness. Yet occasionally, according to night security guards in the neighborhood, a light can be seen moving in the basement windows that, according to the building's current floor plan, should not exist. And sometimes, in the early hours of December 21st, longtime residents of the quarter report hearing what sounds like glass tubes clinking together, carried on the night air from the direction of the old Devereux property. Time, as Eleanor Devereux wrote in her journal, may not be the river we imagine, flowing in one direction. Perhaps it is indeed a circle, or a spiral, or something even more complex that our minds cannot comprehend. Perhaps Thomas Devereux glimpsed that complexity and was consumed by it. Or perhaps he succeeded in whatever he attempted that December night and moved beyond the circle entirely, leaving behind only fragments and whispers for others to piece together. The terminus date, December 21st, 2039, remains decades in our future. What significance it truly holds, if any, we cannot yet know. But in the quiet archives where Devereux's remaining papers slowly disintegrate, in the sealed basements of properties purchased by nameless entities, in the memories of those who encountered the mathematical formulas that should not work but somehow do, a question lingers: what happens when the circle closes again? Some doors, as Catherine Moreau warned, should perhaps remain closed. Some knowledge isn't meant for human minds. But doors once opened are difficult to shut completely, and knowledge once glimpsed leaves traces that can never be fully erased. The blood ritual that Thomas Devereux designed in that New Orleans basement continues to echo across decades, a mathematical whisper promising terrible clarity about the nature of time and its ultimate destination. The Devereux case file may be officially closed, but the questions it raises remain unanswered. And somewhere beyond our perception, the spiral of time continues its inexorable movement toward a point that one brilliant, disturbed mind believed would mark not just an ending, but the beginning of the end. A point where past, present, and future converge, where the barriers between moments dissolve completely, where the circle finally closes again. What awaits us there? Perhaps the answers lie in the fading ink of a madman's equations, or in the basement of an old house on Burgundy Street, where the sound of glass tubes occasionally clinks in a room that shouldn't exist, or in the steady hands of a watch that keeps time to rhythms we cannot comprehend, counting down to a December solstice still to come. Time will tell, it always does, even when we would prefer not to hear its message.